Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. Good to see you here again. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you a bit of an update on the status of the green hydrogen initiative. Of course, with a focus on skills, jobs, needs, and of course the opportunities as well. As the presentation is looking to come up, one of the things I did want to just highlight, just in case we hadn't actually noticed, was we did launch the Social Economic Development Framework with Hyphen in Keetmanshoop on Monday morning. Now that particular framework will be the basis of my presentation today. While it of course looks at an agreement that government does have with Hyphen to develop the requisite skill sets here in Namibia, it also, of course, goes ahead and highlights the obligations of the developer as well as the government to actually provide these jobs, but also to upskill the Namibians. And at the same time, there's a bit of a skills audit that we will have to do. And I must say, after I had a very good discussion with our colleagues from the NCRST, we agreed that in fact, as we are reviewing the baseline studies to be done, we will be engaging with the NCRST for feedback. So maybe if whoever is driving the slides can just go to the next slide if that's possible, we will then start delving into this particular issue. This particular slide really just tries to break down the basis of the conversation that is actually contractual. This framework is captured in the feasibility and implementation agreement, and it was so important that it has actually its own schedule. So Schedule 5 of the FIA specifically talks to the SED framework, and as you can see here, the initial objective of the SED framework was focusing on, of course, employment creation, but of course as well as local procurement. You can see there was a focus on youth participation as well. And then of course these were best estimates in the beginning. We will then be carrying out these baseline studies to try and actually take those targets to commitments. The guiding principles there are good to know, of course, working in good faith, trying to make sure that the project remains cost effective and competitive as well. If we do transition over into the next slide, looks like my click is working now, you will notice that the two criteria that we did include in the request for proposals, the tender that we sent out to the international audience, had both employment and local procurement targets. All of the bidders had to say, look, I think I can get X amount of Namibians to do the jobs that I need, and I think I can buy X amount of goods and services from Namibian companies as well. So those are the two. However, during the negotiations, we did bring in experts from around the world. I think hopefully by now people know that the Namibian government was able to mobilize about $2.5 million to get in international experts to help us with this negotiation process. And those items 3 to 7 actually emanated from government prodding, pushing, and negotiating with Hyphen, and these have now been added in addition. If you look at these two, number 3 actually empowers number 1. Number 3 is skills development. We will need to train and enable Namibians so that we can improve the possibility of maximizing local employment. Enterprise and supply development does the same for local procurement. So not only would you say 30% for locals, but you would say, I would also skill and train and develop SMEs in order to be able to take up that 30%. And then of course, supplementary infrastructure was very important. You will build the project, but of course you will need to also provide housing and other facilities for your employees. So that's covered under 5. And then 6, of course, is philanthropy is important. You need to invest in the communities where you're going to be building and operating this project. And very, very important, we have a very specific obligation and right for governments to review and monitor what the project is doing on a regular basis. This particular slide just maps, right, that what we're going to be doing from an SED framework, green hydrogen projects in general, actually touches various aspects of our national developmental agenda. You can see here all the way from accountability and transparency to youth development, infrastructure development. Green hydrogen is not just about one pillar, it really is about HPP2 accelerating the attainment of Vision 2030 through the NDPs. So practically now, what will this SED process actually entail, and where would academia play a role? So what you can see here is Hyphen and government, after their engagement, we took all of the targets that Hyphen had in their bid, and we've recognized those under the SED targets. However, we know that those targets now have to be ground truth, right? So Hyphen now has to conduct these baseline studies, which, as you can see there, essentially would entail workforce competency and planning modeling to determine the job numbers by type, skills, and competency levels. They are hiring a specific professional firm to go to the ground to engage with schools, tertiary institutions, to conduct interviews with the various communities where they will be looking to source the labor, to try and establish what is the ground truth. They will then be giving us a report, which we will then have to review and verify. So that's the verification of targets. After that verification process, the final commitments will then be entrenched, and it is those commitments that government will use to monitor the progress of this particular project as it gets delivered. As you can imagine there, the Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation, and the broader sort of education sector would be a very, very key stakeholder to engage during the verification of those targets, but even during developing the terms of reference for that particular consulting firm that will be hired. So our ambition is, of course, to really look at the SED framework holistically. Practically, when I was talking to Mr. Pitmayer, okay, Mr. Pitmayer, we've agreed that the NCRST, for example, should be given an opportunity to actually give input to the terms of reference of that baseline study that will be conducted, given their role to coordinate, for example, curricular development, research-focused areas with the universities. And so it's really good that I came here because at least I have met one additional individual. We were always going to work with the NSA as well, especially because they're doing a new census this year, and of course the central bank as well, in order to try and model some of the economic multiplier effects of this particular project, to actually then test the work that needs to get done. These two slides I really specifically wanted to make sure that was focused here as well. These are the skill sets that Hyphen has identified they will need, right? So whether it is mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, rotating equipment engineering, that should be a fairly novel one for Namibia, basically how do you operate wind turbines, maintain them, etc. And then, of course, chemical and process engineering. So that is where, of course, you will be doing the ammonia synthesis to take the hydrogen, combine it with nitrogen using the Haber-Bosch process to be making ammonia. And of course, other spill-offs such as synthetic fuels could come from that process as well. And so this is, of course, the area that most people begin to think about when they're thinking about hydrogen, but this will not be just the core. One of the other key pieces of feedback here from the developers is, of course, as you know, Namibians, we might be aspiring to do masters and PhDs in these areas, but actually the bulk of the labor that will be needed, of the 15,000, are actually sitting in that vocational qualification area. And of course, humbly, it is possibly an area where we really need to focus in terms of resource allocation as a government to really beef up the vocational centers, because this is where we're expected to produce thousands and thousands of Namibians with adequate skills in order to operate, maintain, replace, repair all of this equipment that will be used to actually make this particular product. This was the other skill set. Again, one could forget about this, but super important as well. Fairly general, operating logistics. I mean, for example, just to move the 15,000 people from site and back, people were estimating we might need more than 200 buses, right? So, and of course, all of the yellow equipment that will have to be operated, etc. Systems engineering, IT will be key. I think Anisi and others will talk to you about how this equipment is actually quite intelligent. Eh? Some of it actually has, I don't know if it qualifies as artificial intelligence, but a wind turbine has sensors that can sense various things about its surroundings, where the wind is blowing from, and therefore it rotates. It'll test how strong the wind is. If it's too strong, it'll shut down automatically. In areas where freezing temperatures exist, some of the turbines are intelligent enough to start passing the electricity back into the blade in order to melt any potential frost. Now, we do know the south can be very cold as well, so one may not have expected that for Africa, but in Europe, those wind turbines do that, and I would argue we do sometimes experience freezing conditions in Namibia as well. So IT, programming, running systems will be an important issue as well. Of course, safety, health, and environment would be a very key category, and the last one as well, support services. So it's very important when we're planning for these green hydrogen projects that we don't just focus on this, engineering, and we think that is all that's needed. In actual case, we will be needing quite a few of these more general skill sets as well. And then I think the one thing that, when I put on my economic advisor hat and I'm thinking a bit more broadly, what Namibia is aspiring to do is to do both this and oil in the same decade. When you hear from Mikey, they could be operating 29, 30. We should be operating 28, 29, 30 as well on the green hydrogen perspective. So if you think about the draw from the Namibian public of skill sets, we've never experienced something like that, certainly not at the same time. And it's also very useful to know that this is the one hydrogen project. In the Harambee region now, there are already 3 or 4 others under development. HDF could start construction next year. Dowry's pilot project has already begun to construct there. They've absorbed 100 people. You will get Schiffman is another one that's being developed. Cleanergy is another one that's being developed. So by 27, you may very well have 4 hydrogen projects under construction and an FPSO on its way, ready to potentially get deployed in 2 years. So coordinating that need, I think, will be absolutely critical, and I do expect that the Ministry of Higher Education, together with the Minister of Home Affairs, will play a very critical role in how we get this right. If you really think about Qatar, Dubai, these other places, their countries changed from a population perspective in order to enable them to deliver world-class, hydrocarbon assets. They did have to absorb labor they didn't have internally in order to generate the wealth and the product that we've been able to generate. Now, we obviously have a very high unemployment rate, so we have to do this very, very sensitively. But we have to do a lot of research to make sure that whatever decisions we're taking, they're being done from an informed and an objective perspective. This particular slide then just tries to sort of summarize the work that will have to get done. After those targets have become commitments, they will be, of course, married with an ongoing active stakeholder engagement process, and that then becomes the SED strategy and plan, and that is what will be rolled out to the public and to government. Very important to note that those commitments are enforceable by government. If they don't meet some of those commitments, they have to come up with a remediation plan, and when they do not achieve those commitments after the remediation plan, government actually has avenues within the FIA to take some financial steps. So this particular slide obviously just summarizes everything. What we do think here, though, is this is a very holistic approach to a social economic development process that government has taken. It's fairly unprecedented in various ways, but at the core of it as well, not only are we trying to produce hydrogen, we're also trying to uplift, employ, and transform Namibians and the Namibian industry, and at the same time, we want to make sure that we remain globally competitive and relevant, because the Namibian project is not the largest project in the world, and certainly not the only project in the world by the largest stretch of the imagination. We have to remain competitive and make sure that our molecules find a buyer at an affordable price. So this is what I prepared for you today. I'm obviously grateful to be here, happy to answer some questions afterwards. But of course, I look forward to hearing what Mikey has to say as well. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you.